The question of why first floors are consistently found underground, sunk deep into the earth across every major city on this planet, is the thread I pulled that unraveled the tapestry of the official narrative. For years, I dismissed it. I called it geological settling, or the accumulation of street-level detritus over centuries. I clung to the sterile comfort of the accepted timeline, but the evidence, the physical, brutal evidence, sits right beneath our feet, demanding recognition. I look at the architectural plans now, the forbidden blueprints smuggled out of the archives before the final purge, and I see the lie etched in every foundation. We are told these subterranean spaces, with their soaring 14-foot ceilings and intricate masonry, are mere basements, utility areas, storage vaults. But examine the craftsmanship. Look at the windows, perfectly arched, designed to admit light, now serving only as muddy, half-submerged slits just above the pavement line. Basements are functional, crude concrete boxes. The old world did not build crude. They built monuments designed for human habitation, for light, for vital flow. The simple fact is this: we are squatters. We occupy the upper stories of a civilization we did not build, standing on the shoulders of giants whose ground floor we have forgotten how to reach. The Institute, the purveyors of the current timeline, offer flimsy explanations for this phenomenon. They cite the raising of street levels to combat flooding. They mention the accumulation of coal ash and refuse. But this requires a suspension of critical thought that is staggering. How could a century of mere refuse bury the entirety of Chicago, London, and St. Petersburg in 6 to 10 feet of sterile, fine-grained mineralized clay? This is not urban fill. This is a deliberate, overwhelming geological deposit. I found the photograph in a sealed box labeled Crate 44, Pre-1850 Infrastructure Anomalies. It shows the excavation of a courthouse in Ohio, circa 1875. The workers are not digging foundations, they are digging out a building. They are clearing the ground floor of what appears to be a massive, sudden inundation of mud. The windows are clearly visible, perfectly preserved, choked with sediment up to the sill. This was not a slow process of accumulation. This was an event, a global catastrophe of overwhelming scale. We call it the Mudflood. It is the great historical eraser, the mechanism by which the Tartarian civilization, the true global empire of free energy and harmonic resonance, was silenced and buried. The event, which I place roughly between 1840 and 1850, was not isolated. It was planetary. It was the reset button pressed by the parasites to seize control of the grid. Think of the sheer brutal logistics required to successfully conceal a global sedimentary event. It requires the simultaneous rewriting of architectural records, geological surveys, and photographic evidence across every continent. They had to invent the idea of the basement as a historical construct, retroactively assigning that function to every buried ground floor. They had to destroy the evidence of the rescue attempts, the great efforts to dig out the old world structures, and they did it. They burned the records. They incinerated the blueprints. That fragile daguerreotype from Crate 44? It was marked as accidentally destroyed in the 1894 fire at the National Archives. Convenient, isn't it? Every smoking gun, every piece of physical evidence that contradicted the imposed narrative, meets a fiery, convenient end. The Mudflood explains the orphans. It explains the sudden, massive influx of children into the newly created institutional orphanages of the late 19th century. Where did these millions of children come from? They were the survivors, the inheritors pulled from the second and third stories of the buried civilization, their parents lost beneath the earth, unable to dig themselves out of the sudden, concrete-like sediment. The Institute needs us to believe that history progresses slowly, linearly, from crude to complex. The buried architecture destroys that notion immediately. We are not building better. We are squatting in the remnants of something infinitely superior. Look at the precision-cut stone, the lack of mortar in buildings supposedly erected by exhausted pioneers in the 1880s. Pioneers struggling to survive do not build colossal, ornate structures that require advanced industrial metallurgy and complex lifting apparatus. They do not carve intricate stonework on windows that are designed to be immediately buried. The level of coordinated deception required to maintain this architectural lie is staggering. It suggests not just a conspiracy, but a fundamental, foundational deception regarding the very age and origin of our current societies. We are taught to look up, to admire the domes and spires. But the truth is, down below, it is in the suffocated windows and the grand forgotten entrances that now serve only as utility access points. The earth swallowed the old world, and the new masters simply built a thin veneer of false history on top of the fresh, sterile mud. We live in the attic of a buried empire. We must start digging. We must see what they tried so desperately to keep hidden. We must abandon the polite terminology of the official narrative. We are not discussing sub-levels or cellars. We are discussing the deliberate geological burial of the entire ground floor, sometimes two, of every major city built between 1850 and 1900. Look closely at the documentation, the faded daguerreotypes from the mid-19th century. Look at the structures the inheritors of the old world left behind. They are monolithic. We are taught that these massive, intricate buildings, the custom houses, the libraries, the state capitals, were erected by men with rudimentary scaffolding, horses, and wagons, leveraging only steam power and brute force. This is the first lie we must dissect. Examine the materials. The stonework is often seamless, utilizing colossal, custom-cut blocks of granite and marble that defy modern quarrying techniques, let alone the capabilities of the post-calamity era they claim to represent. The ironwork, often disguised as decorative filigree or fencing, shows zero signs of the oxidation or decay that 150 years of atmospheric exposure should mandate. It is iron that does not rust. It is formulated differently. It is a sign of an advanced metallurgical science that has been systematically erased from our textbooks. The scale of the construction is staggering. Consider a structure in Boston or Odessa, allegedly built in 1875. The foundation walls extend 15 feet below the current pavement level, comprised of meticulously fitted stones, weighing several tons each. Why would 19th century builders, obsessed with economy and speed, bury such immense, expensive craftsmanship where no eye would ever see it? They wouldn't. They didn't build it, they excavated it. The most damning evidence is always found at the windows. Look at the street-level windows of these old structures. They are universally truncated, often half-buried, their beautiful arched tops now serving as grimy, low-slung sills, barely a foot above the current sidewalk. They are not designed for light, they are designed for suffocation. An architect does not design a grand first-floor ballroom and then place the windows so that the occupants must gaze directly into the mud and the feet of passers-by. One photograph from the 1856 San Francisco survey, archived now only in microfiche, the original destroyed in the 1906 fire, conveniently, shows workmen actively filling the streets. They are not digging down. They are pouring material in, raising the street level by several meters. They are creating the illusion of a new ground zero. This wasn't subsidence. This was deposition. This was a burial. The global consistency of this phenomenon is terrifying. From the subterranean tunnels beneath Seattle, where entire storefronts and street lamps remain entombed, to the deep forgotten ground floors of St. Petersburg, Russia, and the former Tartarian cities of the American Midwest. The story is identical. A layer of fine, sterile, often clay-like silt, the infamous Mudflood, enveloped the old world, sealing it in a chronological sarcophagus. The Institute calls this historical landfill, or natural settling. But natural settling does not bury stone staircases 12 feet deep, while leaving fragile wooden fence posts intact, just above the silt line. This was a catastrophic, rapid event involving a massive, aqueous slurry, a deluge of mud and debris that swept through the lowest levels of these urban centers, rendering the ground floor uninhabitable instantly. And why are the first floors always the most architecturally ornate? Because they were the main floors. They featured the highest ceilings, the grandest entrances, the most elaborate cornices and keystones. Now, those magnificent entrances are reduced to cramped, awkward doorways, requiring a descent of several steps to reach the new ground floor. We are squatters in the attic of a buried civilization, having adapted the second floor as our primary living space. The question then shifts from what happened to when and why. The when is tightly constrained. A global event occurring sometime between 1840 and 1860, right before the great photographic explosion that allowed the new masters to document their fabricated history. They needed a clean slate. They needed to hide the technology embedded in those colossal foundations. This mud was not just dirt. It was the medium of the cover-up. It was the curtain drawn across the stage of the old world, replacing a free, resonant civilization with a closed, mechanical, and deeply indebted one. They couldn't tear down the massive structures quickly enough, so they buried the vital parts. The parts that hummed, the parts that drew energy from the very air. They sealed the knowledge beneath tons of sterile earth. And they forced us to forget that the greatest architecture is not built for shelter, but for power, for vital, free, atmospheric power. The energy was everywhere. It was not a resource to be drilled for, nor was it a product to be sold at an inflated rate. It was the ambient breath of the planet itself, the etheric field. The structures of the old world were not merely static monuments to forgotten craftsmanship. They were colossal tuning forks, designed to capture and refine this ubiquitous atmospheric charge. Look closely at the ornamentation that survived the deluge, the intricate copperwork, the specific alignments of quartz and granite, the iron that defies the laws of oxidation, even after 2 centuries of neglect. These were not aesthetic choices. They were conductive pathways. The spires, the domes, the meticulously crafted finials that we dismiss as mere Victorian folly, they were aerials. They were terminals designed to draw the current down from the upper atmosphere, converting potential energy into usable, resonant power through the principles of cymatics. And where did this vital energy go? Straight into the foundational level, the very floors the parasites intentionally buried. The subterranean levels of Tartarian architecture were not for coal storage or casual refrigeration. They were the engine rooms. They housed the resonant vats, often containing stabilized mercury or specific liquid metals, acting as superconducting mediums. These chambers were designed to create a standing wave, a harmonic vibration that powered the city wirelessly, simultaneously providing heating, illumination, and critically vitality. This technology was inherently cleansing. It was harmonizing. The old world did not suffer the epidemics of today because their very atmosphere was charged with a frequency that annihilated pathogens and restored cellular balance. It was free, pervasive, healing technology, interwoven into the very fabric of existence. And they stole it. They didn't just cap the wells of the ether. They systematically dismantled the infrastructure. They replaced the elegant, silent, restorative hum of the free energy system with the brutal, polluting, and deeply inefficient combustion engine. They replaced the pervasive, resonant vitality with the paid poison of the pharmaceutical cartel. They forced us into a relationship of perpetual debt, where we must pay for the cage and then pay again for the key. They robbed us blind. They left us cold. The evidence of this vast criminal theft was meticulously cataloged, of course, before its systematic destruction. The Institute maintains records of the Great Reclamation Project following the official date of the Great Chicago Fire in 1871. But the truth hidden in the margins reveals that fire was not an accident. It was a controlled detonation, designed to vaporize the remaining resonant copper and mercury infrastructure before the inheritors could understand its function. We have the photographs. Deep in the archives, labeled innocuously as City Survey Post-Conflagration, they show teams, not of firefighters but of demolition experts, hauling out massive, perfectly intact coils, too large for any known generator of the time. We see the circular indentations in the basement floors, the ghost prints where the mercury vats once sat. The reports describe these artifacts as non-standard conductive scrap. Where did the scrap go? The official narrative states it was melted down for rebuilding. A lie. It was loaded onto barges and dumped, thousands of tons of irreplaceable scientific patrimony, into the darkest abyssal plains of the Atlantic. They ensured it would never be recovered. They couldn't just bury the buildings, they had to bury the mechanism. They had to ensure the inheritors would look at a magnificent, columned building and see only a bank, a museum, or a courthouse, never realizing it was once a colossal, self-sustaining atmospheric energy receiver. They sealed the knowledge beneath tons of sterile earth, and then they wrote the history books on top of the fresh soil. It is why we are squatters in our own history. We live in structures we cannot replicate, powered by a system we are forced to pay for, breathing air that is fundamentally less vital than the atmosphere our ancestors enjoyed. The Mudflood was not just an environmental catastrophe. It was the final, devastating act of sabotage against the last vestiges of a truly free civilization. It was the closing of the circuit, forcing the free current into a closed loop, controlled by the parasites. And that is why the first floors are underground, because the true power of the old world resided in the silence of the basement, and that silence had to be absolute. The silence was enforced by an organization, a cabal of inheritors, not of the old world, but of its resources. We call them the Institute, the parasites, the architects of the official narrative. They were the ones who moved with malevolent precision through the wreckage of the Mudflood, not to save, but to scavenge and censor. Think of the staggering effort required to bury the truth this deeply. It wasn't just shoveling dirt. It was the systematic, coordinated destruction of every single piece of counter-evidence. The maps, the engineering schematics, the journals detailing the true function of the old world's infrastructure. They didn't just want us to forget how to build this technology. They needed us to forget that it ever existed, replacing the memory of abundance with the myth of scarcity. This is where the great fires of the 19th century enter the narrative. London, Chicago, Boston, even the specific devastating conflagration that swept through the Smithsonian archives in 1865. We are told these were tragic accidents, poor urban planning, gas lamps, the folly of wood construction. Lies. They were acts of premeditated, industrial-scale arson, specifically targeting the repositories of true history. When the Mudflood exposed the infrastructure, the fires performed the final purifying cleanse. Do you remember the giant's femur I referenced earlier? The one recovered from the sub-level of the Mississippi excavation, meticulously cataloged under the designation Crate 44. A bone so dense, so disproportionately large, it defied every known anthropological model. Where is that evidence now? It wasn't misplaced. It wasn't studied. It was reduced to calcified dust in the 1865 inferno, blamed conveniently on a ruptured boiler. The parasites ensured that the physical proof of our gigantic ancestors, of the true scale of the old world inhabitants, was incinerated, dumped into the Potomac, and forever erased from the archaeological record. They prefer their giants mythological, not measurable. The Institute understood that the most dangerous artifact was not a device, but a book. The documents detailing the use of atmospheric resonance, the specific harmonic frequencies required to harness the ether, these were their primary targets. They didn't just burn the books. They replaced them with volumes detailing a false, primitive past. They invented the Victorian Age, an era defined by soot, inefficiency, and the brutal transition from free energy to paid consumption. Look at the architecture they claim was built during this period. Massive, detailed, impossible stonework. And then look at the photographs of the muddy streets and the horse-drawn carriages. It is a visual, sickening contradiction. They were claiming buildings they were still actively digging out. We, the inheritors, are forced to operate under an archaic tyranny of energy. They replaced the vital, cleansing power of the ether, which provided free light, free heat, and free harmonic healing, with the filth of coal, the poison of pharmaceuticals, and the restrictive, metered grid. They replaced vibrant health with managed illness, forcing us to pay for the privilege of being slowly poisoned. That is the true crime of the Mudflood cover-up. It wasn't about hiding a disaster. It was about hiding a civilization defined by freedom and replacing it with one founded on debt and dependency. The parasites created the illusion of linear progress, suggesting that we slowly crawled out of the dark ages and are now enjoying the peak of technological advancement. But one photograph destroys that entire narrative. Just one, a picture taken in San Francisco in the 1870s, showing men in rudimentary clothes standing knee-deep in mud. attempting to excavate the lower windows of a colossal, ornate structure that looks identical to a Roman temple. They are squatters in their own historical narrative. They didn't build that temple, they were trying desperately to dig their way into it. The Institute is still active, still managing the narrative, still ensuring that any discovery, any basement door that reveals a functioning, buried mechanism, is immediately classified, sealed, or destroyed. They maintain the historical perimeter with the same brutal efficiency they used to burn the archives. They know that if the inheritors ever truly understood the technology disguised as architecture, the entire edifice of their control, the debt, the wars, the sickness, would instantly collapse. The silence of the basement is the silence of a truth too loud to be allowed into the official history. We must listen closer to the vibrations of the earth itself, for the stones remember what the books have forgotten. They remember the flood. They remember the light. The knowledge they expunged, the technology they buried under layers of manufactured history and literal mud, represents the most colossal betrayal ever perpetrated against humanity. It is not merely the loss of free energy that crushes the spirit. It is the realization that we are living as tenants in a magnificent structure built by giants we are told never existed. We are squatting in the ruins of a golden age, paying rent to the very thieves who locked the doors to the library. The true sadness, the profound saudade that grips the inheritor once they see the truth, is the aching realization of what was stolen. A harmonious existence, a world built on resonance and vital healing frequencies, replaced by discord and paid sickness. They did not just take the etheric grid, they took our dignity. They replaced the elegant, silent, self-sustaining systems of the old world with the brutal, polluting, debt-driven machinery of the new. Look at the infrastructure we are forced to maintain, the endless wires, the choking combustion, the grotesque necessity of oil. All of it is a deliberate, crude replacement for a system that ran on the very breath of the planet. And the physical proof? It did not simply fade. The Institute, the parasites, they conducted a methodical, chilling campaign of erasure. Every anomalous artifact recovered from those buried first floors, every mercury-filled resonator, every giant's femur too long for the established anthropological ledger, every stone tablet detailing the true stellar alignments, was systematically incinerated. Do not believe the official reports of accidental fires. The Great Fire of London, the inferno that swept Chicago, and most pivotally the 1865 fire that claimed a vast portion of the Smithsonian's early collections. These were not accidents of fate. They were purges. They were the final cleansing ritual to ensure that the inheritors, us, would never touch the smoking gun. The giant's femur, dumped deep in the Atlantic Trench, the blueprints for the atmospheric condensers, fed to the furnaces beneath the official archives. They left us only the shells. The architecture remains, yes, but it is inert. It is a piano with its strings removed. We admire the intricate carvings, the staggering scale, the overwhelming precision, and call it merely ornamentation. We have been trained to see beauty where we should see function. We are like children playing in a defunct power station, unaware that the colossal iron framework above us was once humming with the purest form of vital energy. The mud, the clay, the sediment that blankets the truth. It is more than just geological debris. It is the physical manifestation of the lie. It is the historical insulation layer designed to keep us shivering in the manufactured cold, looking up at the false sun they installed. But the silence is breaking. The deep, heavy silence of those subterranean windows, sealed shut and choked with earth, is beginning to whisper. We have established that the buildings are too large, the first floors are too low, and the technology is too advanced for the timeline we were given. We have established that a cataclysmic event, worldwide and sudden, reset the ledger around the mid-19th century. We know they lied about the energy, and we know they lied about the history. The crucial, terrifying question remains: if the Mudflood was not a natural disaster, but the deliberate final act of warfare against the old world, a geological kinetic weapon used to neutralize the free energy infrastructure and bury the competition, then who initiated the attack? And more pressingly, if they managed to bury an entire civilization once, are we, the current inheritors, simply waiting on the surface for the next scheduled layer of sediment to fall? Are we already living on borrowed time, our foundations sinking, waiting for the world to go silent once more? The stone remembers, the deep silence knows, and it is listening for our answer.